So if we look at what those contact stage guidelines are, well, they were issued to all of your clubs, also available on the IRFU website, and they break down the next couple of weeks from July 20th right up until the start of September into three separate stages: individual contact skills, team contact skills, match contact skills, as we work towards the competition stage. And you'll get more of this from Jamie in detail in a while. We just want to make the point right now to show you that that process is there, and that it's very much around two key areas: injury prevention on one side and COVID-19 risk mitigation, the constant that is with us now, on the other. So as we start, we're basically looking at shield work and one-on-one contact scenarios where face-to-face contact is minimized. Then we move into team contact skills. We start to take a look at set pieces where necessary at that point, but very much looking still at limiting face-to-face contact. And as we build into match contact skills from August 17 onwards, what we're talking about there is more and more game-based scenarios, hitouts that can work towards in-house friendlies towards the end of August, and then we move in to September 5th. Really, what I want to do here is remind you of the behaviours and responsibilities that have gone with every single IRFU guideline which has been issued since the start. We want you to know your role. We want, as a player, as a manager, as a coach, as an administrator, know your roles and responsibilities. And there's a bit of upkeep on that, because as we know, guidelines are forever being changed at government level with as well indeed they should be, but it's up to us as individuals to stay across that, knowing of course that the IRFU will brief you on anything along the way. We want you to show respect to each other, to your club mates and to your teammates, by putting that knowledge and the roles and responsibilities into practice, both on and off the pitch. Off the pitch, all 2 meter distancing and all appropriate behaviours should be there. On pitch, the social distancing element is limited, but every single other piece of good behaviour is around that. And it's also about calling out bad behaviour when you don't see it. And that leads us to number 3. Go train, and go train well. The guidelines are there, the protocols are there, you know your roles and responsibilities. There's every opportunity to, within that, to enjoy all the hard work that you have done, which has allowed rugby to resume and will allow rugby to continue. No plan, no play for those of you who are just getting back into action. Absolutely vital. We are in the contact stage of the IRFU Return to Rugby Summary Roadmap, but that only applies to clubs who have completed the COVID-19 safety planning stage, their health and safety plan, and indeed the risk management tool that goes with that. And that must be submitted to your province or confirmed that your province has it. And a reminder, as always, lads, stay at home if you're feeling sick. Remember hand hygiene and coughing etiquette, and keep social distancing. That gives us an opportunity to move on now. Good afternoon, Amanda.
Good afternoon, Ross. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks a million for giving the opportunity to come on here and have a chat. I'm going to take a look at some of the programs and part of the program and some of the activities that we run within the program, which focus on the fundamental skills and developing skills within activities, and also using small-sided games and activities, as you said, as we return to rugby. I appreciate, Jamie and Peter are going to talk a little bit more around the contact element. But I suppose I just wanted to share some of the activities that we use and that we found useful down through the last number of years as we've run the program, which allow us to develop skills for the players and allow them to do it in maybe a fun environment. Some of our players maybe have been out of action for a number of months, and I'm sure they're all really excited to get back on the pitch. So just one of the games that we would use would be end ball. And again, this can be adapted in any way in which a coach sees fit, from the point of view of being able to pass different directions. So there isn't an overemphasis on the run forward, pass backwards, and it can be just a little bit of fun for players as well as they come back to training. We're also looking at key factors like players looking up, looking for space, and going back to the fundamental skills of evasion, and identifying that space. Another one that we like to use is our attack overload. And again, coaches can adapt this in any way they see fit from the perspective of numbers, size of the area that they're using. So again, another useful one from the perspective of having reduced numbers within their pods of training and groups for training, or their training groups, and again can be adapted in any way. the coach sees fit. So again, just one there, just around a little bit of the player's ability to fix a defender and preserving space. So again, all the skill development that's coming through in this reduced capacity. So it's just another really useful tool that we found during the Give It a Try program to help players become, for our girls in the Give It a Try program, they're becoming more comfortable with a new sport. But again, it's nothing that can't be adapted even with more seasoned players and players returning into our game and just getting them back into the swing of things. One of the, I know Peter, as I said, and Jamie will cover more in terms of the return to contact, but again, we can do little things within our training sessions to start that return to contact. And I suppose one of the things that we look at in introducing the game to everybody is the fall and the tackle. So again, there's no harm in having a game of, you know, touch rugby, which falls within the guidelines, and instead of the players, you know, maybe passing off the ball when they're touched, maybe we can introduce the fall and the tackle, ensuring that we're getting correct technique, knee, hip, shoulder, and going to ground and placing the ball back. And again, no contest on the pitch for the breakdown. And again, just encouraging players to just play and have a bit of fun and enjoyment as we return to rugby and as we return into the contact areas. So I suppose that's just a very short, brief insight into, you know, how we go about Give It a Try and why we go about Give It a Try, and just the little elements in there of how we encourage skill development in our players as they're learning the game and coming into the game. And I'll hand it back over to you, Ross.
Thanks, Amanda. I really appreciate that. And you can see where we're going with this. The guidelines are there, but there's an opportunity very much to bring them to life. And it's with that in mind that we move on to our next contributor this afternoon, Jamie Turkington, also of House IRFU. Great to have you on board, JT. And again, what we're here to talk about is not just the fact that we have a graduated return to contact, but at domestic level, that needs to be actively coached to players, and that's something you're in a position to bring us through this afternoon.
Thanks, Ross, and good afternoon, coaches. My name's Jamie Turkington, and I'm the National Coach Development Manager for the IRFU. Over the next few minutes, I'm just going to take you through hopefully a practical overview of the coaching guidelines or the contact stages as set out by the IRFU. So the overview on this area, first and foremost, I hope you've received these guidelines through your communication channels in your club or your school. But if you haven't, what we're referring to today can be seen on the right-hand side of your screen and can be found on the IRFU website. So the easiest way to discuss these guidelines is via the following statements. Why do we have contact stage guidelines in place? How to best coach during this period? And what to coach during these three contact skill stages. So why do we have contact stage guidelines in place? Firstly, the reason for having contact stage guidelines is very simple and very clear. They're designed to reduce the likelihood of injury and illness to your playing group. The benefit of achieving this, of course, will be greater participation in your training, greater opportunity and availability within your selection group, a greater chance of player and team development, and ultimately improve the performance of your players and team. Although reducing illness is a heightened priority during this pre-season, let's not lose sight of the fact a coaching goal through all of this should be to improve our players and our teams to the best of our coaching ability. So shifting now to consider how we can and should be coaching through this period. My first recommendation is that we always adhere to the guidelines set out by the IRFU. And again, if you don't have access to these currently, you should access the IRFU website. Secondly, be considerate of the training loads that you're asking of your players. We've seen a number of sports across the world with increased rates and severity of injury on returning to practice post-COVID. So I think we can learn from this and will be well planned in relation to how we are welcoming our players back to our game. In a previous IRFU webinar, Martin Kennedy spoke about this in detail. So I suggest revisiting this presentation, or if you're unable to join it at that time, please have a look at it and look at the considerations of training frequency, duration, intensity, and volume. So moving to planning. What I'd suggest through this period is a plan like you've never planned before. We all know the importance of planning as coaches through a normal season, but I think it is now more relevant and important than ever. Specifically, I'll be spending time considering not only content, but the setup and layout of your training space. Considering how to best transition between activities, both to minimize the face-to-face time, but also to be more efficient about how we use our training time. And also I'd like to think about that player movement also through this period too, where they're standing and how they're moving between repetitions and so on. Finally, as a coach, consideration that I would be advising you to think about and spend time on would be your on-pitch communication. To maximize training time and involvement, can all instruction be concise? Can you provide players a clear rationale around your activity selection? And can you favour concurrent and or on-the-run feedback rather than continually stopping your practice to talk? So now looking at the contact stages that Ross highlighted earlier, we want to be clear about, provide a clear indication of the training activity that can and should be taking place over the graduated return to competition. The closer we get to competition, the more training can return to normal. So given that we're currently at the end of the individual skills contact stage or moving towards that, this stage is correctly the most restricted, and we'll explore this alongside looking ahead to the team contact stage. I'm not going to read the guidelines for this section word for word, but instead highlight what to me are the key aspects of this stage. Firstly, the dates. We're currently in this stage, the individual contact skills stage, and will be until August the 2nd. Secondly, we have a responsibility to our players to be minimising face-to-face contact through this period. Finally, we can proceed to contact scenarios if the players are ready, but only to a level of 1v1 currently. And I stress all of the information is important. However, these must always be the fore of our mind. Therefore, coaches, I suggest that we use this period to develop individual core skills. And for me, that would be ball carry, catch pass, tackle, breakdown, and some work on position-specific skills, which we may term as reduced or small-sided activities. So what does that look like? So if I were to run a session to incorporate those elements this evening, keeping in mind load, I would aim to deliver a 60-minute session with roughly an RPE of 4. Again, please refer to Martin's earlier webinar if the term load or RPE does not make sense. A thorough 15-minute warm-up that includes movement preparation and ball handling will be followed by 4 8-minute blocks working on skills. We'll round out the session with either some fun, small-sided challenge-based games or some position-specific skill training. Obviously, this would be influenced by training numbers, coaching staff, and training space, but this would be where I would look to start. So give some visual on that. Our provincial academies are currently working through this phased return to train that we're talking about. I'm going to work to try and play this video for you. So thanks to Leinster and Ulster Academies for sharing that footage. So that's an example of some of the activity that can take place through the individual contact skills. Moving on to the team contact skills, which is permitted from August the 3rd. Again, I'm not going to read the guidelines word for word, but instead I'm going to highlight the 2 new aspects on this stage. We should still reinforce and maintain the work carried out during the previous stages, but we should look to introduce our players to unit skills, building from modified numbers initially, and also the introduction of modified hitouts with contact for your training group. The group numbers can now increase from 1v1 to multiple numbers, such as 2v2 or 3v3. Therefore, coaches, through this stage, I think it's a great time to reinforce the individual and position-specific skills from this stage as we move into the team skill stage, but also then to introduce the unit skill development and modified contact games to our training. The final stage, which I'm going to mention, progress for the team contact skills is followed by match contact skills. And through this stage, we're getting closer to a return to game practice, which most of us will become more comfortable with and happy to operate within. So in summary, what I'd suggest to you as coaches, know, communicate and adhere to the contact stage guidelines. Plan and prepare how you will coach and what you will coach based on your season objectives and pre-season objectives. And if you haven't already set them, set some pre-season objectives and coach with purpose with these in mind. Ultimately, enjoy being back on the pitch and coaching rugby, and I wish you well for the season. Thank you, Ross, and back over to you.
But we are going to move on now and have a chat to Peter Smyth. Peter is the IRFU's Head of Elite Player Development. Peter, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ross. Good afternoon, everyone.
So really grateful to have your time along with everyone else this afternoon. And look, in terms of the day job, I mean, what you're looking at is kind of really mapping out what a return to rugby looks like at academy level across the 4 provinces. So, I mean, we're talking about age grade players. They've had the same training restrictions as the rest of us. So what does that return to rugby look like at academy level?
Yeah, exactly, Ross. I think the big philosophy we went by with that when we were returning the academy players, we wanted to have a clear sight of some games and some competitions. So we eventually reached on the date of the 12th of September when an A interprovincial would be held, and further A games and sevens days would be held over a 6-week block. So we worked back 8 weeks from that, and then the academy boys have been back since the 20th of July. So they're in week 2 at the moment. But that was the big thing, not to come back for the sake of it, to come back with a purpose and a pre-season and a plan in place that culminated in games.
Yeah, I mean, it does sound an awful lot like what that graduated return to contact has looked like a lot across the board. I mean, there's a lot of coaches on this call in particular. They're looking towards their first session back at youth level. So what's that kind of focus like in the early weeks?
Yeah, well, just to kind of give you a slight overview of how the academy started. They came back in week 1 and were being very cautious. Came back, did 3 sessions, mainly just about getting the players moving. No ball was involved. They're currently in week 2 of their pre-season. They've introduced the ball and they're doing some slight opposed drills. So that's where they're at the moment. Obviously, because they've got right to the 12th of September, they're starting very slowly just to get the players back accustomed to moving in certain movement patterns, to getting used to the ball, and then it's going to be stepped up over the coming weeks.
Obviously, you're in constant contact with the academy managers. What's the feedback like?
Yeah, well, they first reintroduced the ball on Monday, and the feedback, I just wrote down some of the words. They said, in particular, rusty seemed to appear across the 4 academies. There was this feeling that players obviously hadn't been in training environments for a long time, so they wouldn't have gone through that process of getting as many touches on the ball. So, they said they were rusty, just their eye was out. And even those points that a lot of the coaches on this call would reinforce the whole time, the key factors around the pass, a lot of the players, just by dint of not doing it regularly, had obviously dropped those. So there's been a lot of reinforcing, a lot of key coaching points. But having spoken to the academy managers again, they could already see the difference in just the second session back, how the players' eye and their skill levels had already stepped up a level from where they were on Monday.
Key learnings?
Key learnings on it, I suppose, is just, I suppose don't set the bar too high when the players are coming back. Realize that it's probably not going to be as you left them maybe in February, March. There will be a bit of a process of just getting them used to, moving with the ball at pace and then passing with the ball. And then, never tire of teaching the basics. Never tired of teaching, the correct key factors in the catch pass, because without that, it's going to be very difficult to build your game for the rest of the season. So that's where the academy guys are at the moment.
Okay, now you've kept a toe in the domestic game. Luckily for St. Mary's College and the 20s that you're involved with there. What are the insights you can share from that side of it?
Yeah, I mean, they followed the same process. Luckily enough, the club got their COVID planning done quite early, so they got the boys back for the first 3 or 4 weeks. It was just a little bit of running and a little bit of movement over the last week, they've introduced the ball and they're just doing some small-sided games. But exactly, they're at the same process as I'm sure everyone is in Irish rugby. You know, they're stepping up their individual contact levels, and I think they've organised a friendly against Turner College for the 29th of August. So obviously they're going to be building towards that for the next 4 or 5 weeks. But yeah, they're in the exact same situation as the academies, and I'm sure everyone else in this call is in just gently feeling their way into the season, and then going to start picking up the intensity and the contact levels over the next 4 or 6 weeks.
So look, you've got your domestic element. You're obviously working across high performance, talent ID. This is an exciting time in rugby. Where, you know, it's pre-season. It's full of promise, and it's full of ambitious young players who are going to want to stand out. You know, across the levels of rugby that you've seen, what is it that can, you know, help a player to stand out? And I suppose specifically for this, how can a coach help to bring that out in a player?
Yeah, well, I think from having a foot in both the domestic and in high performance, I think you can't emphasize enough that, you know, with the academy players, what you're really trying to do is set them up for a 10-year plus career involvement in rugby. And the domestic game, it's the exact same. You're trying to set them up for, you know, especially with age grade players, for a 10 plus year time of playing rugby and enjoying it. And to that extent, then, you know, to go back to the 4 key core skills the whole time, I find when you're looking at players, what differentiates a lot of them is generally things like the tackle, things like catch pass, things like individual skills. So if you as a coach incorporate those into all your sessions and keep reinforcing them, you're on the right track of making those players better. Because if you have them for a certain period of time, be it as under 14s, 16s, 18s, 20s, they will move on to another coach. And if those fundamentals are right, they will be able to push through teams to progress, you know, and eventually get talent ID'd for age grade or representative squads and push right through. So the one thing I would say to everyone, you know, as coaches, don't tire the basics, because the game revolves around the basics and the fundamentals, and making those fundamentals as enjoyative and creative as you can during those periods are going to set your players up for a very successful season, and then moving forward in Irish rugby in many different ways.
And look, just you mentioned a bit of ring rust earlier on there. Probably worth a reminder to coaches not to go too hard on guys and girls where the skill levels just aren't going to be the same as they were all those many months ago when we were doing this the last time.
No, I know, and I think, you know, the coaching department as well references a lot about these growth errors. Just my advice in would take every error as a growth error, maybe for the next 4 to 6 weeks, and give the players a bit of latitude, maybe to be a bit creative and to make those mistakes. And then obviously it's going to be an exciting time, hopefully the end of August, early September, when our clubs and schools do get back playing. And I think that's the most important thing is, you know, we've spoken about, even with the academies, that it is going to be a longer process and a longer pre-season than it traditionally has. I think the same is going to apply to the clubs and schools. So letting players get out there, firstly enjoying themselves, re-emphasising the core skills and the basics of it, and then when errors do happen, just encouraging them and saying, well, listen, we've all been off for a while. I'm sure some of our coaching might take a while to get up to standard as well as the players playing. So I think if we all just encourage each other over the next period, we'll be in a good place come September.